As Jeremy said in his email this morning, we're sort of turning from the urgent to the important, so to speak, and the sort of analogy that Doug used in his articles. So if you've missed any of the webinars on the more urgent issues like direct mail or major gifts or events or foundations, you can head over to philanthropydaily.com and catch the old webinars there. There's a link right at the top of the page. Of course, we have corresponding articles for each of the webinar topics too, so feel free to dig through there for anything you need. If you see anything missing, I would actually ask you to send me an email. We want to provide as many resources as we can for right now. So if you have questions or ideas for things you're not seeing, let me know, and I'll see if I can find somebody who can help you think through that and give us an article or maybe have a conversation about it. If you haven't been with us before, I'm Austin Detweiler. I'm the managing editor of Philanthropy Daily, and I'm joined today by Doug Schneider and Laurel McCombs to discuss data and strategic planning. This might seem like an odd time to discuss strategic planning, but as Doug wrote in his Philanthropy Daily articles, there is really no time like the present. And we know planning is extremely important, that it really sets you up for success because we can see it in the data. American Philanthropic runs an annual survey of hundreds of nonprofits from all different sectors to create benchmarks and gain some insight into what does and doesn't promote fundraising success. One thing we see every time is that organizations who have plans and use those plans grow faster than organizations without development plans. I also want to draw your attention to Jeremy Beer's article from Monday morning, just because last week there was a question about projected revenue declines. Jeremy happily was working on that question already. He crunched some numbers to estimate how much of a hit the charitable sector is going to take. If we look at how charitable giving tends to map onto GDP, it's been roughly 2% since the mid-20th century. And then if we look at economists' predictions about the hit we can expect to take in GDP right now, it looks like we'll see about a 10% decrease in overall charitable giving as a result of this downturn. As Jeremy says in the article, it's a painful hit to be sure, and some will feel it more than others, but it gives us a number to work with. So I think that's worth having in the back of our minds as we start thinking about strategic planning and how we're going to adjust right now. Of course, economic forecasting is not a hard science. There's a lot of variable, a lot of room for error, but it gives us a way forward, something to sort of start moving with. With that, I'm just going to turn it over to the panelists for their thoughts on planning during a pandemic. Today, we have Laurel McCombs with us. Laurel is a senior philanthropy advisor with the Osborne Group, and she's been in the nonprofit sector for 20 years. In her consulting work, Laurel regularly helps clients with donor management, strategic planning, and much more. And she regularly runs workshops or speaks at conferences and professional associations for fundraisers. Prior to joining the Osborne Group, Laurel worked with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the Girl Scouts, and even some time as a program officer in healthcare philanthropy. So she has extensive experience from all sides of the nonprofit world. Doug Schneider is our other panelist today. He's a managing partner with American Philanthropic. He's been with the firm almost since the beginning. Prior to that, Doug was the director of development at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. It's an educational nonprofit in his native and still his home state of Delaware. With AmPhil, Doug frequently helps clients with strategic planning and development department management, and he too regularly speaks or runs training sessions both in person and online. So Doug and Laurel have a lot to bring us today. Right before I hand it over to Doug and then to Laurel, they'll have a few minutes of remarks to get us started, but after that, we're going to go straight into answering your questions. So please start sending them in using either the Q&A tool or the chat box. If you hover your mouse over the screen, you'll see those options down the bottom. We have several hundred, approaching 1,000 people today. So again, we want to keep things as general as possible. But one of the nice things about planning is it tends to be universal principles. So send your questions. And with that, I'll let you get us started, Doug.
All right. Thank you, Austin. Thanks for everyone who's joining us today. It's good to be with you. And I'm excited to be doing this with Laurel. I've had the opportunity to do some other training events with her in person, and she's awesome. And I'm sure she's going to have a lot of really good things to say. So whether you listen to me or not, it's another story, but you should definitely listen to Laurel. But we're excited to be talking about strategic planning. It is maybe a slightly odd topic, or you might be wondering, okay, why are they talking about strategic planning right now? Especially amidst a pandemic and the crisis and kind of immediate needs and the urgency of the moment. Of course, those are serious. And we've been addressing them. We will continue to address them in this webinar series. But it's interesting. I would say the reality of the moment has given us time. You might say forced us to have extra time that we might not otherwise have. And so I think it's warrants to think about how we're going to use it and hopefully use it wisely. And I think one way that as a nonprofit leader and folks in development can do that is think about planning. So my hope in the remarks I have here and Laurel's and the Q&A that follows is that, maybe there's one or two takeaways or ideas that you can take and apply based on your own circumstances. That would be my goal. Austin already mentioned this, and I wrote about it in my piece. The perennial challenge with planning is the tyranny of the urgent, crowding out what's important. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And I want to say here at the outset that my remarks here, my general remarks, they can really be applied to organizational strategic plans as well as development plans. Organizational plans obviously being a little bit broader, and fundraising plans being much more focused on fundraising. Of course, a good strategic plan is going to have a significant portion of it being directed to and addressing fundraising. But as I go through, the principles apply really to both. And I'll be talking, have a few comments for those of you with a plan currently. And if you have a plan, that's awesome. Congratulations. That's really good and important. And as Austin said, we know that organizations that have strategic plans and fundraising plans, statistically speaking, they just do better. They raise more money. But some of you, I realize, may not have a plan, and I'll have a few remarks just for you as well. So just if you think about like strategic planning, just generally speaking, certainly the way we approach it, there's a lot of lead up and work to be done to the moment that you sit down and do planning. But at the point that you're figuring out what your goals are, your objectives, et cetera, you're basically starting big and you're drilling down, right? You focus at the big vision, mission, what's your landmark goal over a certain period of time, and then you develop your strategies, and then you really start drilling down into the activities and the tasks and timelines, breaking it down into component pieces. I would say in this moment, if you have a plan, there's a lot of uncertainty. We're 4 weeks in, 5 weeks into the pandemic and the quarantine. It's really hard to, I think, look beyond that with great certainty right this moment. So I would suggest take a look at your plan and look at the proximate. Take a look at what you can do in the near term, in the next month, this month, next month, this quarter. What are the activities? What are the tasks? And prioritize those. Ask questions. Big one is, are you on track generally? But then, what do you have lined up that you're supposed to do? Can you do it, or can't you do it? And then how do you make decisions based off of that? I think it's really easy right now to be overwhelmed by kind of the totality of the situation. There's so much we can't control right now. It's just completely out of our control. But there are certain things that you can control. And I would encourage you, vis-a-vis your plan, to look at those things and focus on those. This is not the time to throw away your plan. This is not the time to disregard it. It's certainly a time to review and adjust. And I think if you have a solid plan in place, one that's actionable and you can execute, look at what it says. Don't just disregard it. You don't want to also blindly just follow it, considering that, the environment has changed drastically, but take a look and see what you can do now, what's reasonable versus, what may need to be put aside, maybe indefinitely, but, maybe it's just 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, maybe it's next year. All right. One kind of example of this, making adjustments and looking at objectives and priorities might be, if from a fundraising standpoint, if you do a lot of events, and I know we've done a session here on events, and rely heavily on in-person meetings, which by the way is great. You should do a lot of in-person meetings with your donors if possible. That might be, not might be, it is a challenge right now. It's a significant challenge. So maybe those are some things that you need to put off or readjust significantly, but can you do more mail? Can and should you be doing more digital? How do you move those things around from a timeline standpoint? Maybe a certain event that is scheduled for the spring can be pushed off until the fall. Maybe an acquisition mailing that you're going to be doing in the fall, September timeframe, for one reason or another, you might now have added resources because you're not doing an event to do a mailing now. That's just one example. As you review your task lists and activities, and again, the timelines related to them, if you have a solid development plan, there's probably lots of little pieces in there that you have some flexibility of when you do them. And I'll just run through a few. They may not be in your plan, but some things to consider, like the creation of collateral material, right? Maybe you're going to do a revamp. Maybe you're going to rewrite or take a look at your case for support. Maybe part of your plan is filling the pipeline of prospects, whether they're individual donor prospects or foundation prospects. What does the research component of your plan look like? Maybe this is the time to fill the pipeline. Maybe you've wanted to launch a foundation program, and maybe that takes the time to build that out, to create the collateral material, to again do the research. I mentioned this in the one of the pieces I wrote about if you didn't have a digital strategy and a component of your plan, you probably do now. Maybe that's been sped up in your plan, and maybe you need to think about that for the first time in a real way. This is a great time to take a look at your database and the hygiene of your file. Maybe an opportunity to do some data appending. Focus on what you can control. And I'll give you an example. Austin mentioned I used to be with a nonprofit educational organization, and its primary audience is students and faculty. And so just think about like this kind of scenario. Maybe as part of your plan, you want to reach X number, and for the hypothetical here, X number of students, okay? And you're going to do that through a series of conferences or seminars by a certain date. All right, so say this is something that you're going to be doing by the end of the year, or maybe into the summer, maybe you have summer programs. Well, that's changed. In-person seminars, conferences may not be able to work, but that same audience might still be your target audience. That's part of your plan to reach those students. So maybe you adjust the number. If it was 100 students, maybe you're looking to reach 50. Maybe you actually want to increase it to 150. But maybe the means by which you're reaching them is through a digital platform, Zoom calls like this. I'm not sure what it might be. And maybe you have to adjust the date. Hopefully that gives you some ideas. You think about your work, maybe the plans you have in place, and what you're looking to accomplish, and how you can maybe make some adjustments. As you adjust your plans and take a look at what you want to accomplish and the timelines and how you're going to do it, do consider the ripple effect that might come about. I mean, this is an obvious one, and maybe the most obvious considering the current circumstances. But if you're an event-driven nonprofit and you have your big fundraiser in May, right? Whether it's an auction, a golf outing, a gala dinner, that's not happening now, most likely, and maybe that's into the fall, right? And depending on when your fiscal year is, that could really affect things in a significant way. And if that hypothetically raises $500,000 for you, and that's now being pushed off by 6 months, how does that affect your other plans, right? Where are you going to find the other money to bring in? Those are some of the things just to think about in the context of your plan. Oftentimes, I think the why of your organization remains the same. What you want to accomplish probably by and large remains the same. I'd imagine much of what is changing is the how, the strategies. Take a look at the strategies. I mentioned digital communication as one. This may not be exactly analogous But I've been thinking about this a lot. Just I have 4 kids myself. They're all doing digital education right now. If you think about like, what's the purpose of a school, right? School, well, you educate children. How do they educate children? They educate children by bringing them into the classroom and teaching them. Well, overnight, schools have had to adjust. Now, this is not part of their plan, I'm sure, but overnight, school districts, public, private, schools have had to adjust to figure out how are they going to still accomplish that objective, educating children, but through different means. And I would say, as you think about your work, kind of think maybe in that context, what is your objective? What is it you want to do? Is there, or are you forced to find other means for how to do that? Hopefully that makes sense. Look, the goalposts have moved, the environment has changed. It'd be foolish to say, look, just keep following your plan and everything's gonna be fine. But I do think, having a plan and knowing what your objectives are, while you might need to adjust them and make some modifications, by and large, we're 4 weeks into this. My guess is, if anything, it's some of the how, the strategies, and I would also say maybe the timelines that are going to be affected most at this moment in time. 2 final thoughts for those of you who have plans. I'd say review your resources. What are the investments that you need to make? For some, this is a great time to actually make some investments that you've been waiting on if you have the cash in hand. I realize that's the case. That's not the case for many nonprofits right now. But how does your cash flow affect those investments? When's the timing of them? How are you using technology? Marketing, communications. In some ways, it's a great time to be communicating to your donor base. I just talked with my wife. I looked at the mail today, and it was like 1 piece of mail. I was like, that's interesting. Usually we have 10 different things. So maybe there's opportunities for you from a marketing communication standpoint, both through direct mail, but also, of course, digital, social media. If you're thinking about hiring and you're in position to still hire, I realize, for many organizations are going to be putting off that decision. Maybe you look to hire a digital communication specialist as opposed to a gift officer. Finally, just real quickly on this, I'd say look to communicate the plans that you've had, the plans that you've changed with your board, with leadership, and maybe with some of your key stakeholders and donors. I think you being proactive in this process is meaningful and important to them. Just a few quick thoughts. I'm going to transition here real quickly just to those of you without a plan. Just a couple quick comments related to this. I would say it's, for many of us right now, this is a time of kind of reflection and reassessment in many areas of our lives. I would say it's also appropriate for organizations to be kind of assessing, why they do what they do and how they do it. So revisit your why. Why is it important? Think about your work in the context of the moment right now and what is about to come. We will emerge from this. We don't know exactly what that looks like, but think about your work, your mission, the folks that you serve, the purpose. I realize we have a wide variety of nonprofits represented, but what are the opportunities for you coming out of this? What has changed? What remains the same? And I just think you have use the time that we all now have. I was thinking about this. I spend 7.5 to 8 hours a week just driving to and from the office. Like, what if you take that time, and if you travel by plane and train and everything else, you probably have a lot more time on your hands. Can you use that in a deliberate way for planning purposes? And here's just a couple suggestions. There's a lot more that goes into planning. Here's a couple very quick things I think you can do right now. And it's the assessment part. I would encourage you to take a look at where you're at now and engage your stakeholders, talk with your board members, talk with key donors, talk with your staff, talk with your constituents, your audience. Even before you say, here's where we want to go and how we're going to get there, this is the moment right now where people are reflective, people are thinking, people are actually accessible in ways that they haven't been in the past. You may actually get someone calling you back or returning your email. So this might be an opportunity to have some conversations, acknowledging, of course, the reality of the moment, but also surveying them and asking them what they think about your work. It's the mission of your organization? What are you effective in doing? What are the strengths, the weaknesses? What are the opportunities that they see moving forward? And take a look where there's convergence and divergence in those opinions. Final thought here in the assessment is this is a great time to take a look at your kind of your data and your development and fundraising. I'm sure there's many organizations taking a look right now going, gee, I really wish we had done this. I really wish our donor base was more diversified. I wish we had a foundation for it. You fill in the blank for your particular situation, but take a look at your donors. How many do you have? At what levels are they giving? Look, segment them. I know Laurel's going to talk about this in just a second, but what does your pyramid look like? Retention rates, how many foundations you have, number of donor meetings, et cetera. Do the analysis now, because I think if you do that type of work in this moment, if you don't currently have a plan, when we get through this in the coming weeks and months, you'll have a really great baseline and a foundation, and then to have the questions of say, okay, we're now through this. Where do we want to go and how are we going to get there? And we can talk more about that later if people want to, but I'll stop. And I'm going to turn it over to Laurel.
Great. Thanks, Doug. This is such a great topic, and I'm so excited that American Philanthropic asked me to join them for this topic in particular, because it's something that I think we don't talk enough about in our normal lives. And now that we're in this weird, not normal, we really haven't been talking about it. So I think it's really important. Whenever I talk about planning, there's a quote that I always have to share. It's from a writer named Carlos Castaneda, and he said that in this world we can make ourselves happy or miserable. The amount of work is the same, right? And so at the end of the day, you are all filling your days with something. You're all working really, really hard, doing a bunch of stuff. And you can either make that work super productive and make you feel like you're moving forward and getting off of the hamster wheel, or you can just keep making yourselves crazy. You have a choice. Always have a choice in this world. And I think Doug and I are here today to maybe give you some better choices for how to be using your time right now. Doug talked a lot about this idea of kind of funneling down and starting big, looking at your mission, your vision, your long-term strategic plan, and then really boiling down. And I'm going to start to get down into the boiling down part now. As you start to take that vision, and again, to Doug's point, hopefully you all have a really great vision in place. And if you don't, this is a really good time. Actually, week one of this, I heard from someone at a local organization, and it was the week that everyone was going in to work from home. And he said, my CEO has told us, since we're going to go work from home, to take this time to think big about our organization. And I thought, what a smart CEO, somebody who already then knew that this was an opportunity for us to start thinking bigger, think differently about our organizations, and take this as an opportunity to do some of the thinking that we don't normally get to do. So as you're taking that big vision and you're distilling it down into your annual plan, I know we're already getting a lot of questions in about kind of pivoting your plan, and we'll get to those. I'll hopefully get to that a little bit in the next few minutes, but then also in the Q&A. Ultimately, this is a really great time to look at your existing plan, or build your plan if you don't have one, and project out what this year particularly is going to look like. And hands down, obviously a development plan is a really important part of that. There's a lot of really important things that go into your development plan, your budget, your objectives, metrics, what you're going to do. But I'm going to focus in on maybe what I think is the most important part of your development plan, and probably your most important management tool in general. And this is, for those of you who read the article in Philanthropy Daily yesterday, I talked about table of gifts. And this is the hill I'm gonna die on. I've decided that, when my time is done, if I have just made it so that more people have a table of gifts, then I'm gonna be a happy person. Your table of gifts, for those of you who aren't familiar, is essentially just a table, an Excel spreadsheet that says, this is how much we have to raise, and to raise that much money, this is how many gifts at every level that we need to bring in, and in order to bring in that many gifts, this is how many prospects we need. So it's a way for us to quantify the number of gifts we need, the number of prospects we need, and those two things are really important. Those two things are really important all the time, always, but they're really, really important right now. I know I'm going to jump ahead. I saw a really good question that came in on the Q&A about, Austin had mentioned Jeremy's article mentioning the 10% cut, and they said, should we go line by line down through our donors, or should we just cut 10 to 20% across the off the top? And this is where your table of gifts becomes a super powerful tool. So not only is our overall table of gifts going to tell us how many gifts we need, but we then create what we call a name by name table of gifts, where we actually start to identify who the people are that are going to give us those gifts, who those prospects are. And once you have that name by name table, that is when you do start to go line by line, starting at the top, right? Starting at the top and having discussions with other members of your team, other people who know these donors, and saying, do we think their giving is going to be effective? Have we heard from them that their giving is going to be affected by this, for the good or for the bad, right? I mean, we're hearing about some industries that are coming out of this pretty well, right? And there could be some industries and some donors who have businesses in those industries that could be primed to want to give more this year and will feel a lot of responsibility to give more this year, given that other people are having to cut back. So, never apply a rule across the board, right? My favorite answer to any question is, it depends, right? So always look at your donors individually, starting at the top, and that's where your name by name table of gifts is going to be really, really powerful. Just so that you all know, for those of you who are like, I don't even know where to start with the table of gifts, there's a great article on American Philanthropic's website on how to build one. And you can also go to our website, theosborngroup.com. There's a template, actually an Excel template in our tools and resources section that you can check out there to help get you started. It's not a hard thing to build, but once you build it and you start to use it, it's going to be the thing that you want to go back to every day to make sure that you're prioritizing, right? Because as you are deciding every day, what is it that I'm going to focus on? I'm going to tell you right now that you should be focusing on reaching out to your donors and connecting with people and continuing to build relationships that are meaningful and authentic and sincere. And the way we do that is by having a really good prioritized list that we're going to every day and revisiting. One of the things I'll just mention, that one of the big lessons, I know American Philanthropic has a lot of really smart things to say about kind of predictive modeling and data and recency and frequency and how to determine which of your donors are the ones you should be focusing on. There's kind of a gut check, less quantifiable measure that I've been talking about a lot the last few weeks, which is in the recession in 2007, 2009, one of the things we saw was that if a big donor was giving to, let's say, 10 organizations, when they had to cut back on their philanthropic portfolio, they didn't necessarily, let's say they were going to cut by 40% their philanthropic giving. They didn't give 40% less to all 10 organizations, because they knew that the ones that they loved the most needed them more than ever. So they kept giving at similar levels to their highest priority philanthropies. They just cut everybody else off the list completely, right? So one of the things as you start to prioritize which donors you want to reach out to, I want you to, and there isn't there's not a scientific way necessarily to figure this out, but I want you to use your best fundraiser instincts with this. Look at your top donors. Where are you on their list of philanthropic priorities? If you're 1, 2, or 3 on their list of philanthropic priorities, what do you need to do right now to stay there? And if you're number 4, 5, 6, what do you need to do to move up to the top 3? And if you're below number 6, that's when you start to maybe look at your budget projections and say, we might lose this one. Where are we going to make that up somewhere else? So again, another way to be looking at that name by name table of gifts, prioritizing donors, planning for strategies to reach out to them. And then the other point that I'll make about a table of gifts is, a lot of the questions, and there's been a few questions that have come in about this so far, is asking, one of the questions we're getting the most in webinars like this is kind of like, should we be asking donors? How much should we be asking them for? Your table of gifts is going to help you make some of those decisions. And I would say that the table of gifts in and of itself is a really powerful tool to use in asking. So especially with your board, right now we've gotten a few questions about the board. Your board should be looking at that table of gifts every time they meet. They should be aware of where you are and where your gaps are, both because they are your main source of identifying new potential donors, reaching out, engaging, stewarding your existing donors, and as givers themselves. And I would venture to guess that hopefully if your board member, it's a very different message to go into a board meeting and say, oh my gosh, we have a budget deficit and we need to fill it, and hey board, you need to step up and do that, versus walking into a board meeting and saying, hey, here's our table of gifts, here's our gap, here's where the board is right now. Hey board, what do you feel like your role should be in helping us close this gap? And helping them to realize for themselves what their role should be, whether that's increasing their own personal giving, or going out and helping you to secure other gifts. Same with some of your large donors. If you have donors who are close to you, who've been with you for a long time, show them the table of gifts and say, this is what's going on with us right now. This is where we're seeing some shortfalls. This is some places that we have some gaps. We'd love to, as somebody who's close to our organization and close to our institution, we'd love to get your advice on this. And hopefully some of that advice comes with a little money too. So, I think, again, your table of gifts is hands down your best management tool, planning tool, prioritization tool, and it's not a bad asking tool either. So with that, I'm gonna wrap up my comments, and I know we have a lot of questions that have been coming in. Just to say, again, to Doug's point, you all have, it doesn't necessarily feel like you have more hours in the day, because I know it's getting filled with other stuff, but know that our tendency as human beings is always to fill the time with the thing that is probably the most comfortable, is probably not the scariest thing, and probably isn't the thing that's going to be the most productive or move us forward. So be really honest with yourselves about that. Go back to your plan, go back to your table of gifts, because that's going to be the thing that's going to be your touchstone to know that you're focusing on the right things in this time.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, Doug. That was great. Let me just touch on a few things that came in first. Questions about whether there's a template for putting a full plan together. The best place is Doug's article in Philanthropy Daily today called Planning During COVID. It's not exactly a template, but it sort of walks you through creating a plan. It has all the tools and resources you'll need for that. A template for gift tables in Laurel's piece yesterday. She walks through the utility of a gift table, and actually the first 3 links in that article, one goes to her site, the Osborne Group, with a bunch of resources there. The second link is you can download a table of gift spreadsheet that I assume Laurel already made for you. And the third link is another article we have that walks you through creating it. So all of that is right there, starting with the cover article on Philanthropy Daily today. The first question I want to shoot up to you guys is going into data. What development data do you think is most important for people to be looking at right now in terms of, what's the most stable data, what's prone to disruption, where should we be spending our time in our database?
I'll take a first crack at this, and Laurel can speak to it. I would take a look at, I've been advising a lot of my clients, look at your individual donors and take a look at those that have given recently, frequently, and the longevity. Highest past contribution, of course, matters. And if you've done any type of appending and you have wealth, analysis. But those donors that have been with you the longest, they're loyal, there's a stickiness there, to to you and the organization. I would look hard at that data and that information and, ask yourself, do you know these people? Should you know these people? I mean, the one thing that Laurel was saying, I'm, sitting here nodding, about having just frank conversations with your donors and engaging them and bringing them into this process. Well, it kind of begs the question, do you have those relationships to begin with? And if you don't, and you're going to be thinking about the planning process, that may be like an objective of yours moving forward, to have stronger relationships with your donors, to know them better, et cetera. But, back to just what you can use right now, I would take a look at those that I would just say are loyal donors. Now, hopefully, and you presume some of them are significant donors, major donors, but there might be potential there now for some not only renewals but upgrades if there's capacity that goes along with it. I think organizations that the donors that are going to stay with organizations right now are most likely those that have been longtime supporters. So at least that's where I would start.
Yeah, we were talking too, just to jump on that too, just about data more generally. We were talking a little bit yesterday about just that this is kind of a great time to just look at your data in general and make sure your database is clean, do a little spring cleaning on your database. Yeah. And it's kind of a good time to take a step back and look at some of those metrics that maybe you don't look at. Very often I'm working with a client right now, and we're talking about looking at some of the like yield rates between like the number of people that get identified and then what percentage of them actually make it to getting an ask, and things like that start to highlight maybe roadblocks, challenges in your process or your systems that you can start to fix right now, because you're not kind of in the throes of everything. You have a chance to step back and be a little more objective about maybe there's some issues with your research process. Maybe there's some issues with your, you don't have enough engagement opportunities to look at, right? So, taking a step back and looking at some of those metrics could be really interesting right now.
Yeah. And one other just comment on that is I would also take a look at foundations. There are a number of foundations. I'm seeing more and more RFPs come out where they're addressing real needs within their grantee community. And so there might be opportunities to apply if you're on like a certain cycle or, with them outside of the normal kind of application process. So I would definitely take a look, reach out, have conversations with any foundation supporters. I know of one locally in Delaware that is setting up $1 million plus fund specifically to help nonprofits at this moment dealing with, they're kind of in the throes of it, as it were, dealing with real issues related to COVID. So.
Awesome, thanks. Laurel, thanks for that plug that you probably didn't know about. But tomorrow in Philanthropy Daily, we'll have some articles on data hygiene and updating databases. So if you have even more time during quarantine after you get your strategic plan done, you can then dive into data hygiene, and we'll have some advice there. And to Doug's point about foundations, somebody sent a note in mentioning that they're getting a lot of gifts from donor-advised funds right now, which is a really great point. And so, as Laurel said, you want to look at individual donors. Don't just chop 10% off. If you happen to know donors that might have donor-advised funds out there that they use to give to you, that could be a really good place to look. That's money that's already been given, so to speak, and it's not growing right now, really. So they probably want to use it to help you out. Next question I want to look at. So we had planned to launch a capital campaign in the next 18 to 24 months. Should we stick to that? And if we should, how would you recommend the initial planning stages here during the pandemic? So reaching out to potential supporters.
I'll jump in first. I think, and this goes for, I know there's been a lot of questions in general just about like, what do we do with plans that we had upcoming. Capital campaigns obviously are a really specific beast. I go back to feasibility. If you have already conducted your feasibility study for the campaign, I would look at some of the data, some of the feedback that you got in that feasibility study. What were donors saying to you in terms of just the feasibility of you conducting that campaign in the first place? And then I might go back to some of, especially the bigger donors that participated in that feasibility study and re-interview them given the circumstances. Again, the best way for us to know whether or not donors want to support us is to ask them if they want to support us. All the data in the world, all of the best practices from other organizations in the world aren't going to substitute for just having a candid conversation with our top donors to know, are we still at the top of your list? I know we talked to you, 2 or 3 months ago about investing in this capital campaign. Given everything that's happened in our world, is that still something that you could see yourself doing? I think that's probably the best, gonna start giving you the best answers. I think there may also, just for a capital campaign in specifically, there may also just be some things. I probably wouldn't cancel it altogether because there was a reason you wanted to do it in the first place. I go back to Doug's points about vision and strategic plan, right? I mean, if this capital campaign is core to you achieving your vision over the next 2 to 3 years, then you should continue with that and show your supporters and show people in your community that this is still something that's really important. But you may need to go back to the overall plan and put a little more flexibility should you not be able to raise the funds as quickly as you thought, or maybe you have to push back the public phase or something like that. But I would first go back to feasibility, go back to those donors and have some conversations. I don't know if Doug, you got other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I second all that. I mean, I would look, right now is a really difficult time for campaign. I mean, I was involved with one of the client. They may even be on this call. I don't know, but we were off and running in a quiet phase, and about a quarter of the goal raised during the quiet phase after 2 months, and a very large ask into a foundation. And we had to withdraw the application mainly because of the circumstances. The timing wasn't right. Now the timing might be right in the fall, it might be right next spring, and we're kind of in an idle mode. We're idling, and we're assessing. And I think the campaign still has value. The case is strong, but coming out of this situation, priorities might change. Speaking to the feasibility study, some of the donors, their own priorities might change in what they want to give to. So having those conversations with them, they might want to, and look, and you as an organization, your own needs might change. And so you might be able to have an opportunity to go to some of those donors, and, if there's a pledge in place or a likely, significant gift, maybe that gets reallocated towards something else. I would encourage you to continue planning. If you're 18 to 24 months out, as I understand the question, I wouldn't throw in the towel. I mean, right now, we just don't know what the next few weeks and months look like. And there could be a lot of, pain along the way for us as a nation and organizations and individuals and families, or there could be great opportunities. And so and maybe a little bit of both. I mean, that's the reality, I think, of our current situation. So I would say continue to plan. You might have to delay certain things in the time. I think for many things, especially campaigns, the timelines may need to be extended. You might need to make some adjustments, some of the priorities. And so having those conversations with your key donors right now, or at least in the coming weeks and months, is the appropriate thing to do. Maybe not right this second, but I'd say in the weeks and months ahead.
Awesome, thank you. I'm actually, another colleague sent over some thoughts on this right now, mentioning that there's a lot of background work to do for a capital campaign. So a lot of that might happen simultaneously with donor outreach, but if we can't do that right now, start laying the groundwork with, a case for support, pledge forms, prospectuses, build web pages and everything right now. You can have all of that in place and then just jump into it once we're there. Let's maybe drill into some real detailed and specific things here. You did some of this, Doug, in your article. Normally with strategic planning, we'd want to be together in person. What tips or suggestions do you have for doing that remotely?
Well, I mean, when we approach strategic planning, I think of it like kind of as two major like phases. I mean, there's lots of components, of course, of strategic planning, but I look at the assessment, the audit phase, and then the actual planning phase. Typically, with lots of pieces involved with both. But for the assessment phase, you can do that right now. If you don't have a plan in place, this is a great time. In fact, I think you're probably there's kind of a neon or a bright light being shined upon like areas of your development of your operations that you're probably going, gee whiz, we really need to address that. So I think the assessment aspect, a lot of it's just digging through, asking the right questions, digging through your data, taking a look at, I mean, if it's an organizational plan, your programs, the services that you do, your operations, staffing, budgets, et cetera. For engagement with others. And I mentioned this briefly, but I think this is a great time to have conversations with people, whether it's a formal survey and questionnaire and interview. I mean, that's typically when we do a strategic plan for a client, we're typically interviewing up to about 40 people, 45 people, key stakeholders. And I think this is a great time to do it. We love to do that in person when we can, but I think it's nearly as effective, just as effective over the phone. And now with Zoom calls, we all live on Zoom. I've done more Zoom calls in the last 4 weeks than I've done in my entire life. And I have a sense I'll probably be doing a lot more Zoom calls moving forward, even after this period. So, set up those conversations with people. And I actually think I mentioned this, but I think it's a great time to do those interviews because I think people are accessible. And if they're close to your organization, they might be thinking about you all as well and concerned and, want to see you through this and may have really good insight and thoughts. When you get to the actual planning phase, I mean, the way we do it is we gather all the data, we take a look, we assess, we survey, contrast, compare what people say. And typically what we do is we list our findings in the document along with key recommendations. And those recommendations drive, at least for us, the actual planning process, and that's usually done over a day or 2 days of meetings, sometimes even longer. But those key recommendations, a lot of times are focused on not only things for you to improve as an organization, but then, where do you want to go? What do you want to accomplish? What are the key objectives? I mean, it can be done over Zoom. It's not as good as in person. That's just a reality. My recommendation right now, though, is if you're in the planning process, is I would probably, I don't know if I'd suggest having a strategic planning right this second. I think you can do a lot of the prep work, and in the coming weeks and months, as we have some clarity of the way forward, that's probably a really good time to have that meeting. If it needs to be by Zoom, you can do it by Zoom. I mean, this is a technical thing, practical thing. I might extend. It's really hard to be on a call like this, like all day long. So maybe you extend it over like 2 or 3 days, like, 3 half days over the course of a week or something like that, just a practical matter. Hopefully that answers the question. But if people have questions about strategic planning specifically, I mean, people can reach out to me. I'm happy to, if there's inquiries, to give more detail, on at least our process and how we go about it.
Awesome. Here's a good one. We have a 5-year development plan in place. We're in year 2. Had been going well. Should we redo all of the planning and the goals for those later years, or just adjust this year and assume that things will get back on track by next year?
You want this one, Laura?
I'm sure Doug has really good things to say. I mean, I think obviously I'd start with this year, and then I would kind of then look at subsequent years and look at what changes this year, what impact that may have on subsequent years. I mean, there's going to be some obvious things like, if you were looking to gradually grow revenue by 5% every year over the course of the strategic plan, and maybe you don't get to do that this year, what impact then does that have kind of rolling out for the rest of the years? Other things like if you were looking at building, maybe you have a strategic goal around building your staff. That included adding 2 new staff positions this year and 2 more next year and 3 more the following year, whatever it is. Maybe you don't add those 2 staff positions this year, and then what impact does that have? So I'd start with this year. I'd start with some of the changes this year and then look at how that impacts. But I'm a super glass half full kind of girl. So I'm always gonna say, stick with your big vision. Obviously we kind of want to always have like our 3 levels of planning, right? Like our worst case scenario, our probable, and then our best case scenario. But always have that best case scenario out there, because it forces you to strive harder and push harder. It's also the thing that's going to get donors excited, right? So if you're trying to inspire donors and get them really excited about solutions that your organization is putting out there, presenting them with that best case scenario that is still the full achievement of the vision that you set out for that 5-year plan is, you can say, we're not sure if we're going to get there now based on everything that's happened, but we sure are still going to try. And we'd love to have your help trying. I think that's a really cool message to put out to donors right now. So I don't know, Doug, if you have other thoughts.
No, I agree. I mean, I've had a couple conversations with just some clients who, actually have new initiatives and projects, and they're talking with donors. And it's interesting because the reaction is like, wow, you have something new. And, I think that evokes confidence and, shows, kind of the strength of your organization and also the vision and leadership, actually. I mean, 2 real quick things. I mean, to your question, should you scrap everything 5 years, 4 or 5 years? No, I would say no, it's way too early. I mean, I think, making adjustments this year, absolutely. For some groups, you have to take a look at your fiscal year. If your fiscal year just ended March 31st, which may not be the case for the person asking this question, but like, you might be okay. I mean, you actually, you may have, the timing of that may have been perfect for you, depending on where you're at. But the way I would actually probably answer that question, you have the fundraising goals, right? But what are the fundraising goals tied to? Like what programs, services, projects, initiatives? And I think coming out of this, you have to take a look at how do we change as an organization? Have our priorities changed for like what it is that we actually do? Do we need actually to raise more money? Maybe there's an opportunity to do even greater good and more work in a certain area, based on the area, that you're focused on, but maybe you have to ratchet back. So I would actually, in part at least, not just look at it like taking fundraising in a vacuum of some, dollar goal, revenue to raise. I would take a look at it tied to your programs first and what adjustments you might need to make, to your programs and services and projects, et cetera, and then work back from that.
Great. All right, we have a few minutes left. Let's see how much rapid fire we can do to fly through these. First one, which segments of the database do we focus on? Trying to communicate, stay in front of everybody, stay relevant, but we don't want to wear out our welcome.
Doug and I probably have different answers to this, I would guess. I'm a major gifts kid, right? So like, I'm always going to be like, focus on your top donors, period. But I also know that American Philanthropic, I will admittedly say I'm not a direct mail. That's not my expertise. It's not, and so that's why I always say, go talk to American Philanthropic when people come to me with direct mail questions, because it's not my area of expertise. So I'm always going to say, start at the top and work your way down. But I also know that there's real need to keep that base of the pyramid solid, make sure that you're continuing to fill that solid. Doug, talk maybe more about that.
I would not disagree. Because you have to take a look at your pyramid. The majority of your funds from almost any group is going to come from a small percentage of the donors. It's like almost like a 10-90 rule. So I would focus there first and foremost. If you have to pick one thing, ideally you want to keep other things moving too. But that is probably what's going to help you meet your budget, or those major donors.
Great. Board, should we ask the board to increase their giving by the same percentage we anticipate in losses? So if we project a 10% loss, do we ask the board for 10% more from each of them?
Again, I go back to, I'm going to guess that most of your board members are giving far less than 10% under their current capacity right now anyway. So I think I think they could probably step up even more than that. I wouldn't, like we said earlier, I'd use the table of gifts. I'd go back and show them that table of gifts, and I'd say, hey, here's how many gifts we need. Here's the gap. What do you guys think? And I think that's where your board has an opportunity to step up and say, yeah, I know I've been giving you $1,000 every year because that's what our minimum give get is, but I actually have capacity to give you 100,000, and maybe now's the time that I actually step up to do that. So I'd give them that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the relationship you have with your existing board members at the time. And if it's not a good one, it's again, shining light on an area of maybe improvement is something to work on moving forward. But I think it's important to have individual conversations with board members. And I think this is where, if you have a good relationship, especially with leadership, like the chair of the board, I think a peer-to-peer request is appropriate. And I think that can go a long way to inspire, some of the other board members. So I, might look at that as a strategy, actually leveraging an existing board member, in particular the chair, but doesn't have to be the chair exclusively. Sometimes there's very influential board members that them saying the right thing can go a long way to inspire others.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap up there then. I want to just, so next week we'll be back for social media and online marketing. We'll have Eric Streif again, and he'll be joined with Kelly De Leon. She's been doing marketing and strategy for almost 20 years, both for-profit and nonprofit work. She'll let you know tomorrow is our first industry-specific webinar for fundraisers in higher education. Again, that's at 2:00 Eastern Time to talk about the unique challenges colleges and universities are facing. The registration link for that is at American Philanthropic's website at the events tab. So just go to AmericanPhilanthropic.com, click events, you'll find it. 2 weeks from now, we're also hosting a webinar for church parishes to discuss their fundraising needs and solutions. We will have more info on that very soon. And finally, American Philanthropic's talent pool. If you're thinking about new work, needing new work or anything, you can check that out on our website as well. We collect resumes. We do a lot of hiring for clients. And if you want to be on our radar, you can sign up right there. Thank you again, Doug, Laurel, for your time. That was very excellent. And thanks everyone for joining us. We will look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye, guys.